if I looked at the search term like women's pink rubber coated insulated water bottle, like that's my exact product. Now, the more specific you get to the product, the more specific the search is, the lower your search volume is going to be. So what we always look to do on product launches is like we try and find the intersection between good search volume, and good to us is like maybe even a couple thousand depending on the budget, that also have really good relevancy to the product. Because what you're trying to do is you want to get in front of your exact shoppers. So example would be insulated water bottle is going to be really expensive and not super specific to my product. Like it's kind of specific, but not really specific. I'm trying to say like, okay, where can I start getting super specific to my product, but it's going to have enough search volume that I can get the sales volume that I need. So I would focus more on that versus that I would looking at only search volume. A bit of a technical answer here is we don't quote move them, meaning we're not going to pause the existing keywords. We're simply going to launch them in another match type. Again, make sure to keep the bids lower. Amazon actually, if you read their recommendations, they recommend keeping bids lower on broad and phrase match, even lower than the exact match. When we would launch those is honestly really dependent on performance of the account and availability of the budget. So if you launch a keyword in exact phrase and broad, so you have 50 keywords, right? And you launch them in exact phrase and broad, you technically have, 150 keywords that you've launched. And the potential of broad and phrase to spend could be quite high. So again, you just want to make sure it makes sense. It seems super simplistic, but if you are in a phase where you're struggling to control total ACoS and ACoS, to fix those two numbers, it really means that you have to lower down your ad spend with ideally little to no impact of the total sales or the ad sales in the case of ACoS. If you introduce a whole, again, those 50 keywords in exact phrase and broad, and those you probably need to test and optimize the bids, etc., you're introducing a lot of additional ad spend into the account. So you do want to be aware of that and be careful with that. So that's kind of a benchmark that we use. But overall, I would say, I don't know if I would have like a certain time frame or a frame which I would hold back on. It really is dependent on the performance of the account. Another good question, which best bid strategy for phrase and exacts when you move? So again, we don't really move them. We would simply launch them in addition. We like to separate them by campaign as well. I think it gives us a little bit more control over, say, budgets for things. Now, as far as the bidding strategy, we're a super huge fan of using mainly dynamic down only. If it is a keyword that we want to ensure that we get impressions for, so for our launch keywords, for our main keywords, for anything we're trying to be aggressive with, we prefer a fixed bidding strategy. It's still going to be the same. It's still going to be pick highly relevant keywords. One other tip is pick keywords that fit within the budget of the account that you're launching. So for instance, if I have a couple $100 a day budget versus $50 a day budget, those launches are actually going to look a little bit different because I can't afford that many clicks on a $50 a day budget. Or if I had, a couple $100 or $1,000, I have a lot more room for clicks. So actually, you want budgets to play into your launch strategy. The other thing that you want to keep in mind, do not expect profitability on launch. This is a huge one. There's a lot of people that try and pull back and knee-jerk for profitability right out of the gate. That is not going to happen. The reason why it's not going to happen, and I'll tell you the numbers behind the numbers, is that ACoS is just going to be high on your product launches, and that is a function of two things. One, the aggressive cost per click you have to set to be able to get visibility in the beginning, and two, how low your product conversion rate is going to be, especially if you're launching without reviews. Those two things, once you start to be able to bring your cost per clicks down because you gain momentum or you're optimizing your bids, and then two, once your product conversion rate starts to increase because you're getting those reviews, maybe you're optimizing your listing a little bit more because you've learned more about your target market, that is going to help bring down your target ACoS. So those things, again, conversion rates are going to be low, high cost per click. That's actually like the nuts and bolts of why your ads are not profitable, and it's almost unreasonable to expect profitability in the beginning. And that's actually why, if you've ever had a product where you're like, no matter what I do, I cannot seem to bring the ACoS down, I'm struggling here, it's a function of that your conversion rate is remaining low and it's not improving, and your cost per clicks are remaining high and you're not able to improve them due to the market or something else. So again, I would still say pick highly relevant keywords. Also make sure that whatever keywords that you have fits within your budget. Launch them. Aggressive, sponsored product, exact match, potentially sponsored brand video, exact match if you have the creative. Double down on that for a couple weeks and then start expanding from there. Hello, and welcome back to another Ask Junglr segment. I'm super excited for this one. This is going to be a really special episode because we have a really awesome guest. So if you saw that little blurb in the screenshot, you know who it is. I'm going to bring him up here in a second. But first off, I just want to say, hey, welcome. If this is your first time joining in, we really appreciate you joining. And if you are one of the ones who is faithful every week to join, we always appreciate you as well. Or if you catch on the replay, hopefully you find value. But hey, if you don't know, my name is Elizabeth Greene. This is called the Ask Junglr segment because this is sponsored by the agency that I'm co-founder of, which is Junglr. So we focus on helping running business-centric ads for sellers who are looking to scale, typically more founder-led brands, which means you have to scale off of your own bottom line. You don't typically have a big war chest to dump into your ads, which means you have to make sure that you're running business-centric strategies. And so we run strategies for categories all the way from supplements to clothing and everything in between, baby, high price, beauty, skincare, all of the good things, lots of different contextual things. I'm sure we're going to talk about that a lot when we get into today's topic specifically. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up Dustin. Dustin, welcome to Ask Junglr.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's a pleasure to be on here with you.
I was trying to remember like when we got connected. It's been a hot minute. I know you've been very gracious and shared a lot when it comes to API stuff. That's what you're doing. You're head of product, correct?
Head of product at BTR, and I feel like we've kind of known each other for several years at this point through like Brian Johnson's Facebook group and other places online.
OG, yes.
Finally, we're able to connect. I think a couple of Prospers ago, maybe one or two, and it's been a great relationship over the years.
Yeah. So if you don't know Dustin, you totally should. He has had a product over at BTR, which means he gets into a lot of the back end. And the thing that I've always appreciated about your content is one, just how much you share, but it's super nitty gritty in the weeds, like a lot of the technicals that I myself super appreciate and try to get into. So I always really appreciate what you're sharing. So if you're not following Dustin on LinkedIn, you totally should be. So Dustin reached out to me. He was like, hey, I'm thinking about doing a cool topic. Would love to collab on it. And I was like, absolutely. And so one of the topics that always really comes up a lot, or at least we touch on, even if it's not a specific question in these segments, is bid adjustments. Mm-hmm. How to adjust bids? Where do you adjust bids? And I know back in the day, before you guys were Better Media, OG, you all talked a lot. I know you guys put out a lot of content around bid optimizations, and we're really bullish, I think rightfully so, on making sure that like bid adjustments being one of, I still think it is one of the biggest levers you can pull in terms of making sure that you're running effective advertising.
Yeah, it's been fun integrating into what was Better AMS and eventually BTR. And actually, believe it or not, until I came on, Better AMS was managing $60-70 million a year in spend with bulk files. So nice. If anybody tells you can't do it, you can.
It can be done. It can be done. You all have proved it. That's awesome. So we already have questions rolling in. So again, if this is your first time joining, we welcome you. We had a couple pre-questions asked. By the way, we will prioritize bid optimization questions. Depending on how much time we have today, we'll probably end up getting to some other questions. But what we do is, again, use the chat wherever you're listening in. Ask your Amazon ad bid question. Again, prioritizing bids. We'll talk about it all today. And then we'll pull it up on screen. And then Dustin and I will give you our best possible answer. And so the first question, here's a good one. And obviously going into Black Friday, Cyber Monday, there's probably gonna be a lot of questions around that. But they're saying, hey, Elizabeth, update from last week, was raising the bids aggressively. Impression came in. Now ACOS is a little high. Yeah. So last week, Grigor was like, hey, I was having issues getting impressions. And I'm like, as much as it kind of sucks, typically the answer is just keep raising bids till you start getting impressions, even though that can mean that things get a little bit high. So great. Sounds like you were able to get the impressions, but now the ACOS is getting a little bit high. So how do you, I mean, that's always the struggle. How do you all approach these kind of issues?
So just to confirm the context, we're talking about a scenario where you have a bunch of targets, they're not getting any impressions, then you incrementally are raising bids.
Yeah.
That can be a really tricky one. And what I break it down into is 2 buckets. You've either got a bid problem, or I guess it could be 3, a relevance problem, or just a nuance of the algorithm problem, where no matter what, you can be relevant, you can have great bids, but you're just not going to serve impressions because the algorithm just is not respecting it. So the first thing is to identify which of those it is. Typically, I tell people if you look at the account or even the product line and you look at the average CPC for it, and you're starting your bids roughly at that and you're not getting impressions, then that tells me I'm leaning towards it's something with the algorithm. There are little techniques you can use to kind of force it through, if you will. I won't get too far into the weeds on that, but I'm always a little hesitant to incorporate into bid ops as a whole some kind of low or no impression bid boost, because I feel like what it can do is create all these little landmines across the entire account where you've got these huge bids, none are serving impressions, and then all of a sudden, bam, they're coming up here, they're coming up over here. So you do have to be very mindful of it.
I agree. That's actually, we put out a little while ago, and I've talked about a couple of times, like kind of going into these tentpole days, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Prime Day that we just have, like, you know, so starting good, just sort of account cleanup optimization type strategies. That's one of them. I'm like, hey, check your high bids, no impression keywords. Those things sneak up on you. It's actually really easy to check them in the targeting tab. And so that's, yeah. As far as this specific question, before we move on, I would say, I would, like Dustin was saying, there could be a couple things that it is. One is it could be kind of an algorithm thing, which it seems like you've circumvented that a little bit with just, you know, jacking up the bids. So congratulations on the impressions. Unfortunately, what's happening is that you're getting clicks at such a high cost per click. That's why that high cost is happening. So there's really a couple different decisions. One, you say the ACOS is a little high. You didn't say like, hey, it's crazy. So my thought is that might just be kind of the pay to play you have right now. Things that will bring the ACOS down is if you can prove out good conversion rates, good click-through rates. It's not a bulletproof solution. I never like to bank on your cost per clicks will go down once the algorithm starts to like your product. It does happen. It's not guaranteed. So it might just be that you want to give it time. And then the other thing would be just see if the ACOS is a little high. How high is a little high? How much are you losing? And is there sort of reverberating effects on the organic ranking? And if there are, then oftentimes it's worth sort of sacrificing that high ACOS. If there's not, and say this is like maybe a random auto campaign or something, well, then that might be something to reevaluate. And then the only other thing I would say is that I'd be curious to know this. So when you have something that you kind of want to like baby the impressions or be like very cognizant of the impressions, but you still really should lower bids to help with the whole ACOS thing. Do you guys have a specific strategy on that other than like do it incrementally?
No, we just do it incrementally. And one thing I wanted to also mention too on top of that is we like to launch all your targets in every match type, because I have found that sometimes the algorithm just respects one match type over another. If you launch yoga pants or yoga mat in broad phrase and exact, you might get the search terms you want through phrase, and it serves nothing through the other two. So that's another way to try to circumvent if it is an algorithm issue.
Yeah, no, that's a great thing. It's also sometimes the bane of our existence as ad managers.
Yeah,
There's
it
also
can be.
like broad match and they hate exact match. And we're just like, why? It's annoying. I'll grant you it's annoying, but it is a good strategy again to launch them in other mat types. Again, if I'm kind of skipping around, again, I'm prioritizing bid optimization questions. We'll probably have time to get to all questions, but just fair warning for anyone asking anything. Cool. So Kim is always in here with fantastic questions. So this is a really interesting one. I love this question, Kim. So she's saying, hey guys, bid optimization sequence. When do you not change a bid? Meaning, when do you consider a keyword bid optimize, or is like optimizing converting targets? So basically, like, is there ever a scenario in which you look at something and you say, you know what? I'm just not going to touch that. I'm going to leave it alone, maybe save it for the next bid cycle or go back and reanalyze it.
Well, it depends on how you approach your bid adjustments. If you do it on like a percentage of how far you are from ACOS, if you have a certain window that you're within, then I probably wouldn't touch that. The approach that we take is a little bit more strategic, and it looks at like a dollar increment amount. And there's really never a time where I'll leave a target alone, because if I'm running around to bid ops every night, I have new data that I can base that adjustment off of. So I'm happy if it's just even a few cents of an adjustment to run that. If you have the tech, whether bulk files or some kind of other solution that allows you to do that. But if the tech is in the way and that doesn't allow you to scale it the way that you need to run it every night, then I might try to look at things a little bit more gently, so that you don't need to be as aggressive with optimizing things that are close to the ACOS.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I think to Dustin's point, it really is dependent on the keyword performance and if the keyword performance is in line with your goals for that keyword. Like, so if you're hitting goals for that keyword, I think that would be the one, maybe the only scenario in which I would leave it alone. Which, as Dustin was saying, like sometimes you base that on ACOS. You know, how far am I away from specific goals, even if you're changing it a couple percentage points. But like Dustin was saying, the closer you are to your goal, the less you should be adjusting. Meaning you will, like, you know, if you're not too far off targets, you're probably making very small micro adjustments, like that's what I'm saying, even a couple cents, you know, when you're kind of doing those recalculations. If you're far off, you know, then maybe there's a more drastic cut. I'm sure there's probably people asking about those kind of like, all right, you know, the needle is always moving. But I love that question though, because I think that's a good one on people's minds. Like, hey, do I ever just like not touch it? I think sometimes people can go in either direction. One, like over optimizing, and then other ones, it's almost like I'm almost afraid to touch anything because I don't want to screw, you know, yes, there's things that could be changed. I don't want to screw anything up.
Yeah.
So I would say, again, if you are dead on target, then, you know, even if you ran some sort of bid calculation, it would say not move it. So I think that would be the one specific scenario. I guess I would say a nuance to that, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe to add in, is if it's more of like a ranking keyword. But again, it's kind of like we kind of have this, I'm sure you have something very similar, almost like baked into the algorithm of like being very careful with specific targets. It's almost like if our goals are not solely ACOS focused, meaning it's like a ranking keyword and we're more prioritizing like sales velocity, then even if the ACOS would be, you know, maybe like a couple points off of where we want it to be, we might, again, but then we go back to goals. Goals are not necessarily ACOS in that scenario. So the one specific goal of sales velocity, that would be like our priority. And if that's in line and we're not too far off the second priority, that might be a scenario in which we would just kind of allow that to hang. But.
Yeah, I would agree. I was going to go there with it, but I didn't think that it met the context of the question. But we employ a blacklisting system for different strategies. So if you have an awareness goal versus a ranking versus a conquesting versus specific tentpole event campaigns, we'll just blacklist those and exclude them from bid ops entirely. So technically not changing the bid on those.
Good. I assume, is that something you go through and do like manual tweaks and adjustments to, or how do you all approach that?
As far as a blacklisting system,
Yeah.
so we have two campaign tagging systems that sit on top of all the ASINs in the catalog and then all of the campaigns in the ad account. And we just have, I think, up to 12 tags that we can apply to a campaign. And say, for instance, tag 3 is all of your different strategies. We can add a metric to bid ops where we say, okay, if a campaign is tagged with ranking, then just any targets found within that campaign, don't run them through the bid ops cycle, etc.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I think, to be perfectly honest, whether you're using like your own internal software that you all have developed like yourself or like what we use, or if you're using some other, any of the many, many options in terms of bid optimization softwares out there, I think any good strategy always has those outliers and exclusions, or at the very least, like almost like a separate rule set. At least that's what I've found. To be perfectly frank, I don't want to bash any systems out there, but I think the systems that I find the most personal frustration with are always the ones where it's like there's always like this all or nothing and let the system completely decide what gets priority or not. I don't mind those systems so much as long as I can be like, hey, don't touch this. But the minute you take that out of my control, that's where I start to get a little frustrated with the results.
Yeah. And, Elizabeth, there is one more that pops into mind before we go to the next question. So something that I have recommended to people in the space is if you have a threshold for the number of orders that a target has before adjusting bids on it, I think this can be helpful. And the reason is because we've all seen those targets that have one impression, one click, one order. And if you run your normal formula on this, you get this obnoxiously high bid. If you require 2 orders or more, the number of instances where you get, say, 2 orders or 2 impressions, 2 clicks, 2 orders, it goes down significantly. If you have 3 orders as a minimum, it's basically non-existent. So I understand for some small accounts, requiring 2 or 3 orders per target might eliminate a lot of targets that you're optimizing, but just throwing it out there that there are a lot of scenarios where you might not want to run bid ops unless it has a certain number of, say, clicks or orders.
No, I love it, which is precisely why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because I know you're like is super in the weeds like that, and you've thought through, it's all those outliers, those if-then statements, and what that extrapolates out to. So
because I made so many mistakes not thinking through them initially. So you learn by trial by fire.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that is what I've said so many times on this sort of, I don't know if you call it episode or segment or whatever. I'm like, look, if anyone has a strong opinion in the ad community about something, they have battle scars.
Yeah. Yes. Very true.
That's awesome. So, I mean, here's another tricky one. So, hey, Elizabeth, thoughts how you look at keyword inflation? So definitely, I mean, cost per clicks are rising. We're going into Black Friday, Cyber Monday. How do you approach those types of scenarios?
There's a few ways that you can do it. I think the easiest way is if you have some kind of a blacklisting system where if, for instance, you see certain campaigns or certain targets that are rising considerably, and you're probably going to see a drop off in conversion because people are window shopping. So it's like a double-edged sword here. You can factor that in. If you have a really sophisticated system, you can look at the data from the prior year and look at these dates and kind of incorporate last year's increase in data into this year's. So you're not just running blindly with these same formulas going into the holiday season. I would say those are 2 really good starting points. Probably the former one a little bit easier. Yeah.
I liked your thing about back data. So that's something that we do. We do have access to some systems where we can go back and look, pulling. That's the only thing is you can only go back 90 days. So you have to like think about it and archive it. Yeah. But we do try and keep bulk file archives from last year. So at the very least, if all systems and things are down, like we have still the old manual we can go back to look at, which is often very surprising. Let me ask you, this is outside of the scope of bid optimizations. Do you ever leave sort of bids relatively consistent and adjust down using budgets to cap spend, say like prior to a peak, and then sort of releasing those budgets going into?
I don't have a system personally that I built for BTR doing that. That's something that some of the account managers might do, but
Yeah.
I prefer to try to control spend personally at the bid level rather than budgets because
Hmm.
you could technically have a garbage account, or I'm
Yeah.
sorry, a garbage campaign that's performing poorly. Whereas if you fix your bids in there and you can control spend by either dropping the ACOS or even pausing certain targets for a period just to control that amount of
Hmm.
spend, you're having really good performance for all the spend that's flowing through that campaign.
Yeah.
But it's really at the discretion of the account manager.
Yeah. No, I would agree. I think things like that, I was talking about capping budgets and doing that. I think to build a system that does it, like we were saying, potential extrapolations of decisions, I think that one has the potential to not do so great if you don't know
Hmm.
what you're doing.
Hmm.
I never want to say like, oh, it's an advanced strategy. I don't want to explain it. When I say like, oh, this is advanced or more complicated, it's like there are potential things that can go wrong. So like,
Hmm.
don't just like take what I say, blanket apply it.
Sure.
That is something I've seen some of our account managers use with good results. I think the reason why you might fall on that strategy versus only doing bid optimizations is if the bids required to get the campaign to perform at the level that you need it to means that you essentially cut off all impressions. I think
Hmm.
that's kind of, which again, honestly really needs to be on a case by case basis.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Hopefully, Danielle, we answered your question thoroughly. As always, if we're going through anything and anything we say, you're like, I'm curious to understand that one a little bit more, feel free to drop a follow-up question in the chat. Here's an interesting one: seasonality. That's always a fun one. So what should be our strategy for a seasonal product off season? If the product is related to health related, it's consumable, what strategies do we follow for such product? It sounds like this is overall strategy, although again, we could go into bid optimizations more specifically if you had any thoughts there.
Well, off season to me means just lower traffic.
Yeah.
And even if it means lower conversion, your bids will incrementally come down.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to increase the speed at which they come down, especially if you have a prior year to look at to where they would roughly run during the summer, if your peak season is the winter,
Mm-hmm.
you could either do a bulk upload or the targets tab and speed the process up. But I personally don't, unless it's like a Valentine's Day campaign that you're running in July, then obviously there's
Yeah.
not too much benefit to keeping that running. But yeah, I mean, bids should come down, impressions will come down, conversion will come down, and bids will adjust accordingly. So I would approach it like that. And if you want to keep things cleaned up and you can remember to unpause things or not launch another duplicate campaign that already exists, then pausing them for the time being, I think is fine.
Yeah. No, that's great feedback. One tip that we found, and this applies a little bit more to if you're not really sure how to keep good records or if you're doing things in bulk. We've done like sort of the not pause where like you might put like, I don't know, 3 cent, 5 cent, 7 cent, anything that's like a marker. So it's like a random bid that you would never like actually set for a campaign.
Yeah.
And then that sort of leaves, so if you randomly find it in your account and it would still be live, so you know that you didn't pause it due to say poor performance, it was just like a seasonal thing. That can be super helpful. And I think Dustin pretty much covered it. The only other just add-on or contextual thing I would add to this is what we've seen is that, like Dustin said, bids should naturally lower, cost per click should naturally lower. They don't always, so it is helpful to keep up with bid adjustments. But if you're basing it off performance and, like you said, conversion rates going down, well, then a cost is going to go up and you're naturally going to be lowering bids anyways for your profitability targets or goals or whatever they are. The only thing that I would caution against is the reason why you're seeing sales decreases is it's a market trend. So you definitely want to validate it whenever you're like seeing things. You want to be like, it's completely seasonal. Like you can check things like your search volumes. You can check search query performance is a great way to check. What else?
Brand metrics is a good
brand
one.
metrics is a fantastic way to check. Product opportunity explorer, fantastic way to check. There's all options, and you can just use one of those. You don't have to use all of the above. But I would say whenever we've seen a brand sort of try and fight against market trends, like sales are naturally decreasing due to consumer behavior, and there's really nothing outside of that, and they're trying to like make up for that consumer behavior with super aggressive ads. I've pretty much always seen that be super unprofitable and not juice isn't typically worth the squeeze in those scenarios, unless the brand obviously has like decided and you're very clear, like, hey, this is going to be super unprofitable. This is what we perceive is going to happen. If you still want to run it, fine, but just heads up, it's not really gonna. It's a consumer thing.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And going back to your, I think you said pause, not pause, or something along those lines.
Oh yeah.
I think that's a fantastic approach. If you run low bids, there's always the chance that you're still going to serve some impressions at a really great cost per click. And it's effectively like pausing it anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of the best of both worlds. And I don't have any like empirical evidence on this, but I personally like to keep seasoned campaigns that have impressions that the algorithm has respected.
Yeah.
Up, running, not paused. I don't like to
agree.
mess with them as much as possible, because once the algorithm respects it and acknowledges it, you want to just keep everything with it as much as possible left alone. If you've experienced this, you know what I'm talking about.
I 100% agree. I 100% agree. Again, I think both of us are like emphatically saying that because, again, battle scars of pausing things when things shouldn't have been paused, or getting into accounts and seeing the results of when somebody paused something that shouldn't have been paused. Yes, do be very careful. Again, heads up, everybody, I'm prioritizing bid optimization questions. If we have time, I'll cycle back through these, but we're about halfway through, so fingers crossed. A lot of people saying, let's see. All right. Maybe we'll go into this again. We'll maybe approach it more from a bid optimization level. But seeing as you're launching a new product, maybe tomorrow, time is of the essence, it sounds like. And I would like to get Dustin's take on, so launching a new product, best ad strategy.
Whew, okay. I have to take my tech hat off for a second to try to think of this.
I know best is relative.
Well, the reason that I say that is because there are some tools where Amazon has suggested keywords that are really helpful at times. And actually, this is something that Dustin and I discussed when I first came on, because just to give you a quick story of it, we noticed that in vendor accounts, when you added an ASIN launching a campaign, all the suggested keywords and targets were highly relevant. They made perfect sense. But if you did it in a seller account,
those are notoriously.
And the algorithm doesn't understand the ASIN yet. It doesn't understand everything. So it just gives its best guess. But if you take a seasoned seller ASIN, then it gives good suggestions. So it's a little easier with the API and tech, but basically you can go into a vendor account. You can take your ASIN, find a competitor that's ranking great on the SERP. They have a lot of reviews. The algorithm obviously knows what they are. You put that ASIN in, it's going to give you all of the good suggested keywords that it's already performing well for, if that makes sense.
Oh, interesting.
So with the API, like I say, it's a little bit easier to scale this, but you can actually use this a little bit as a hack for trying to see what Amazon first-party data, what it determines for this relevant ASIN that's a competitor of yours, what it's suggesting they should be launching. Outside of that, I mean, I think auto campaigns are a great place to start. I'm not a huge fan of doing a lot of keyword research in third-party tools. My approach personally, since I've been starting Amazon brands, was an ad manager at one time, account manager. I like pretty much 3 to 4 things. I like auto campaigns, search term reports, brand analytics, and just basic intuition. I mean, I feel like most people, if they look at a product, they can tell you, knowing a little bit about it, what the top keywords are going to be for it. So approaching it like that, running bids, seeing what Amazon's suggested bids are. But if you have anything in the account that you can compare to see this is what the CPC is, then that's always a good starting point as well.
Yeah. I would agree with all the above, except for I do like third-party tools. Personally, just that's something. But I would 100% agree with Dustin. You need to be curating everything for relevancy to the product. Like, you understand where the product fits. A great rule of thumb, I know this is manual, but if you go on an incognito browser or something that's not tainted by your past search history and you type that keyword into search, what does the search page look like? Does your product belong there? Like, even when I'm doing keyword research or I'm trying to look at what somebody's targeting, how well does this make sense, or trying to understand why conversion rates are what they are in certain things, that's what I do still to this day. With all the tools out there, with all the other analytics stuff that we still use, absolutely. It's still like, does this fit on a page? That is still a really, really good barometer, because the algorithm, in essence, is saying like, hey, who is converting best for this product, who is selling the most on this product. And so if they've won that position, you know that that's what shoppers are looking for and purchasing when searching that search page. So you can be confident, hey, if my product fits here on this search page and I think I can compete here, then I have a pretty good shot of this being very relevant to my product. And oftentimes what you will find, if this is a new product, now you should have gone through this in the launch, like in the product research phase, under kind of like understanding your search market. But if you haven't, oftentimes when you're going down any sort of keyword list, you'll be like, oh yeah, that sounds like my product. And then you'll look at the search page and you're like, nope, that's not anywhere near close to what I thought. And you'll start to find these phrases or ways you're like, okay, that's, whenever I see that particular phrase or root word, it's not applicable. But this root word, this 2-word phrase, this is super applicable. And you'll start to like, honestly, that's why I'm a fan of, again, it takes time. It's super manual. Depends on your bandwidth. Also depends on like your budget for the launch, right? If you have a really aggressive launch budget, you might want to be a little bit more curated. If it's more of a low burn, low bid, maybe you can afford to, just get it up there a little bit quicker. But I would say, like, if you can just, especially if this is your first product, just go through and understand what those search pages look like. Start to understand what your shopper is typing in to find the product. Because honestly, there is overlap, but SEO for listing purposes and Amazon advertising, you kind of have a little bit different objectives, and the more like specific you can get while still maintaining any sort of search volume is kind of that sweet spot you want to be in when you're choosing, again, Amazon ad targets, because you're paying for those clicks. Cost you nothing to put it in the back end of your SEO other than, just it taking part of the spots up. But when it comes to advertising, you're paying for those clicks on the search page. So the more, you can't be like, you can never be 100% confident of anything, but if you can be the most confident you possibly can be that it will convert, or at least that's what shoppers are looking for, that's where you want to start spending at least those initial dollars. Cool. All right. All right, here's one going off of reducing bids. So do you think one method of optimizing is reducing bids to the cost per click? So this is an interesting one. Like, how far do you go? What is your barometer? She said, I see in Helium 10, it's one of their suggestions for reducing wasted ad spend. This is never something I considered on a broad scale. So do you ever use the set bid at CPC? Or is there a context in which you might factor that in?
We factor this in on pretty much every adjustment that we make. When you're adjusting your bid, you're calculating the ideal CPC at the given conversion rate to hit the target ACOS. So ideally, you're setting the CPC. We set the bid, but that's the CPC we want. We adjust our bids incrementally. So if we have, say, a $3 bid and it needs to come down to $2, we do it in, say, 10 or 20% increments. But the point that I make to people when I'm discussing bid ops is, until you actually get that $3, if you have to hit $2, or if you have to hit 1 and your CPC is 2 and your bid is 3. Until your bid gets to CPC, it's not going to make any difference.
Mm.
If you need to get down to $1, if you're a 3 and then you cut down 50% on your bids, you think, wow, I just made a big impact. Now I'm at $1.50. But CPC is only $1, so nothing there has changed. So it should actually be, the way that I look at it is always looking actually at what CPC is when you're making your adjustments, with the caveat that if you don't want to make huge swings in your bid and you want to incrementally work them down, then look at what bid is and adjust incrementally off of that.
Yeah, I am going to 100% agree with what Dustin just said. I'll add a couple like contextual things on top of it. One, which is basically just kind of expanding on what Dustin just said, of like, hey, if your bid's $3 and your CPC is $1, that jump between those two is going to be significant. But yes, the dollar CPC is what you're actually paying. So technically speaking, until your bid, reaches or goes below that, will you actually be lowering what you're paying? So I agree with that. I also agree with that sort of incremental approach, because we're basically fighting the market here. So if we took that $3 down to $1, the cost of that is, yes, lowering our CPC, but it also lowers impressions often.
Mm-hmm.
And for very important targets, sometimes a drastic reduction in impressions is actually like going to be going against our primary goal, which is, sales and visibility and all that. So that's where the technical nuances of bid adjustments come in, honestly, because we could all here be like, hey, I want to hit XYZ target at ACOS. This is the mathematical equation to do that. If all these numbers worked out correctly, you would hit that target. The question is, are you still competitive in the market at that bid? And then that's the thing we're trying to like figure out how to get to. So going back to what Dustin said is, if that jump, like if you were, let's say it's like clicks with no sale keyword, or there's something where you need to cut it off and you're okay with sacrificing impressions because of whatever the performance of the keyword is, that would be when you might make that drastic jump. Mm-hmm. That's kind of how we approach it. But if there is a case, what Dustin was saying is like, hey, we'll do that incremental lowering of bids. So we recognize it will take us longer to get there, but at least we can start to see where those impressions drop off and where that becomes the problem. And then we just know, okay, maybe we need to readjust our expectations in terms of ACOS targets. The only other caveat I will give you is be very careful, which I'm sure Dustin has factored this into all the stuff they're doing on the back end, is if you are using any sort of placement percentage adjustments.
You beat me to it.
Yes, your cost per click will often be above your bids. Yes. And so you need to like be careful. So if you're adjusting based off of CPC, I believe Helium 10's factor that in. I would assume that they would have, but there may be a case if you're not watching for that where you can actually inadvertently increase your bids versus decrease your bids if all you're going off of is that. So just be careful. All right. All right. This looks like a two-parter. So why is this is a fun one, going off of date ranges. I know before this you kind of sent me a doc and you were talking about date ranges and things, and you've alluded to it in this conversation. You're saying, why is it so hard to find a keyword that has a lifetime bad ACOS? So if you're looking at lifetime, like, hey, these things performed really well, and whenever I regressively reduce a bid, it's painful to look back and see what this target, that the target performs so well. He's saying, would it make sense to take my best 20% targets that bring 80% of the good results? It looks like that's a second question. So going back to this one is like, hey, I see what it used to do. It used to do fantastic. Doesn't it right now? So I need to optimize based off of current data, but it's a little bit painful because I know shoulda, woulda, coulda. How do you, is there an approach? Do you just optimize based on what's happening right now? Do you factor in that good past performance?
I factor in on what's going on right now. Honestly, I've never really looked at lifetime performance on a target and factored that into anything going on, just because the market changes from the demand side and from the supply side. So you have new competitors that are entering in at the ad auction. Some of them go away. New customers come and go. things change on Amazon and in the algorithm. So rather than looking at 2 or 3 years or 6 months or whatever worth of data and seeing what a target does, I mean, I think it might be helpful maybe in a little bit of context, but I want to adjust based on what's going on right now. Curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say be very careful looking back at things. Trust me, I get it, right? We all have those campaigns where like, gosh darn it, this thing used to do like 5% ACOS and now it's all the way up to 15, right? Like, man, I wish. I don't think looking at lifetime is bad. It can be I like lifetime views to catch the things that have never worked. Because I think sometimes if you're looking at short date ranges, if you factor in, say, like all time of a target and you realize like, oh crap, this thing never converted for me and it's been like spending incrementally every single month, that can be really helpful. The other thing that you might look at maybe would be, say you have a target that was paused or something. This is a little bit more manual work, a little bit more in the weeds, but if you're trying to like reactivate a product or trying to figure out like, okay, where was this performing and I need to push this a little bit more, maybe the product has matured and you can like reactivate or try some additional keywords again. But yeah, if we're talking about this is what it's doing right now, I know I need to optimize it, but dang, I'm looking at lifetime. I would agree with Dustin. Like, you don't want to hurt yourself now because you're looking backward too far, is what I would say. So if looking back at it is going to end up like you in the present wasting money, I would prefer just to look at what's happening right now. Steven's jumping on. Steven Knock. He's saying, do you plan to use the new B2B bid adjustment feature?
Hey, Steven. I just did a podcast with him. I don't know why he's jumping on this one to hijack it.
Hey, he's giving us engagement. We appreciate it.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
I don't know if that's putting you on the spot. I honestly am not fully aware of this option. So
yeah, it's one of the new adjustments. I honestly have not gotten into using it yet. There are so many other pieces of low-hanging fruit. Amazon is just releasing so much at this point in time that the new B2B bid adjustment is just not something that I have on my immediate radar. But as soon as I do get it, I'll reach out to you, Steven, and we'll do an episode on it.
That would be awesome. Yeah, so the other one from Joseph, this is an interesting question. This goes into like duplication and like various bid strategies. But he was asking like, hey, would it make sense if I take my best 20% targets, that whole 80-20 rule, this is the stuff that's bringing performance, and then duplicate those keywords in a new campaign, but put, say, like lower or higher bids. So you almost have like one high bid, one low bid. The goal here is like, hey, do I get different placements? Can I sort of spread myself out? Do you guys do anything like that? Is that more like an incremental case-by-case basis, or?
So we would do something like that, but only in the context of, so we have the same targets running in separate campaigns based on match type. So we segment one ASIN per campaign, one ad group per campaign, one match type.
Yeah.
But we would run the same targets if we were running an additional goal. Like if we wanted a target that we wanted to drive rank, awareness, conquest, or defense, we would run that in several instances, plus that anchor of the account with the efficiency, profitability, target ACOS, where we're just running our normal bid ops on, and then look at those goals and adjust accordingly for those separate ones. And that's why we would end up running a higher bid, because we're trying to achieve those separate goals.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. Awesome. I believe we do something very similar to that. Cool. All right. So we have about 15 minutes left. So we're prioritizing bid adjustments. We'll see what other ones we can get to. So if I'm skipping over, apologize. That's why. All right. Let's see. I don't know if there's a really specific answer to this other than like, congratulations. He's saying, hey, how can it be possible? So you checked an account. There was a CPC of 4 cents, 21 clicks, and 3 orders. He's saying, hey, I got 21 clicks and Amazon only charged me 4 cents. Please share your thoughts about the situation. My thoughts are I'm jealous, but
I really don't have any thoughts on that one. I mean, I would just expect to see over the next 30 days how things
Yeah.
attribute or adjust because I mean, I've seen plenty of instances where I have orders and 0 clicks, and so my CPC is 0, but it
Yeah.
eventually seems like it always adjusts out. So give it some time, maybe.
Yeah. I would say give it time and enjoy the current data.
Yeah.
Steven saying you demand, and Elizabeth, we appreciate it. Cool. All right. So we got some time. It looks like I ran through most of the bid ops questions. So I'm going to go. We'll just go through some general ones and I'll keep checking back if anyone has any PPC questions. We've got about 10 minutes left, so you can sneak those in. So if you got a bid ops question, you'll jump to the front of the line. But otherwise, we'll run through these ones. Here's a good question about grouping campaigns. I know you kind of talked a little bit about like separating out campaigns by match types 100%. And I don't know if you explicitly mentioned it. From my understanding, you guys do one ad group, one campaign, correct?
One ad group per campaign, one ASIN per campaign. So to speak to Louise's question here, if you have the tech that will support it, I always advocate for granularity with running separate ASINs per ad group per campaign. So even if it's a lower selling ASIN, a child variation that doesn't get a lot of traffic, I still find that it's more helpful to segment it for a variety of reasons. If it is so extremely similar to the other child ASINs, then I might run multiple child ASINs per ad group.
Mm-hmm.
I know that a lot of our account managers, if it's something it's very specific situation, but we typically try to advertise every ASIN in the account with its own campaign.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We do. So we always 100% always will segment based on if it's a individual parent ASIN. Like that should always be the illustration I always give is it's like landing pages. Like you would never run the ad that would direct traffic to like different landing pages because you want to see like how that traffic converts on that specific landing page. It would be the exact same thing if you're just like lumping all products into one campaign, which I think we all know those dump campaigns. As much as we hate them, they do technically get really good performance, but from a like optimization and scalability standpoint, you really hamstring yourself. So I agree with Dustin. Separate. The separation allows. Let me know if I'm off here. This is what I keep saying. I'm like, guys, it's not because it's a performance thing necessarily. It's about a control thing and an optimization thing while you split everything out.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay.
I find that it's just easier when you're trying to attribute sales back to an ASIN and you're using, especially in the API, using the advertised ASIN, the purchase product report, and you have everything segmented out, no matter how small and how little traffic the ASIN is getting. I just find that it's easier to work with. And so many of our clients love to see something pulled together on the ASIN level of seeing ACOS and tacos. And that's just significantly easier to do when you're segmenting all the child ASINs out.
Yeah. Lewis had another question about, all right, so here's the tricky ones when one ad type doesn't necessarily perform as well as the other one. So he's saying, hey, I'm driving about 60% of sales through sponsored brands, but ACOS is getting high. I already have sponsored product campaigns with the best keywords and match types, but the sales, they're all coming from sponsored brand ads.
I'm curious to hear what you have to say on this one.
It's a rough scenario, man. I always like caveat these, like, I feel your pain. I've been there. Gosh. I would say this is the one thing that I really try and always look at is from a metric standpoint. What metrics are present in sponsored brand ads that are not present in sponsored product ads? Meaning, is it like an impressions thing? Because if it's an impressions thing, there might be a hesitation to increase the bids to the level which you need. Sometimes, as much as sponsored brand ads can oftentimes be very competitive in terms of bids, there are certain scenarios where sponsored product ads are almost bonkers in terms of their competitiveness. So
Mhm.
I would look at like, is it an impression thing? Is it like a click-through rate thing? Are you saying? Obviously, it seems like it's an order thing, so it's a conversion thing. So then I would say like, just where you're appearing on that search page. Are you all the way down on page 3? Those shoppers tend to be like less buyer centric. It is kind of dependent on category. So if at all possible to kind of see like where something works, and then I say, when in doubt and you can't figure it out at all, you might always test. You said you're running a bunch of sponsored product ads with the best selling keywords. So it sounds like you have your bases covered in terms of manual, but have you tried like a high bid auto? Sometimes it's like when you can't figure out what works, sometimes you just got to lean on the algorithm a little bit to see if it can find something that converts for you. Caveat, sometimes that can be expensive, and obviously it's not like the first thing I might jump to, but if you're trying to figure it out, that might be a good test option.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would look at the context too of, is sponsored products doing poorly relative to sponsor brands? Because I've managed accounts in the past where I didn't really have any strong evidence as to why sponsor brands was doing so much better, but sponsor products was doing adequate and sponsor brands just did great. So I just kind of went with it. I didn't really like force the budgets down to bring it to the traditional 60-40 or 80-20.
Yeah.
It's usually not that way, but just some accounts that I've managed in the past, I had no real explanation as to why, and it just worked out that way, and the performance was still great, so I went with it.
Yeah. I would 100% agree with that. I think there's the quote ideal where, everyone's like, hey, 75 to 80% of my budget's on sponsored products. Sponsored products have the biggest impact on ranking, everything sponsored products. Then you add in, all the other ad types, or you have those accounts where you're like, all right, the main keywords are high relevancy keywords. And then you try that and you're like, doesn't work. Or everyone's like, you have to use exact match. And you're like, broad match is the only thing converting. So there are certain accounts where you almost kind of like throw out best case, or not best case scenario, but like, what would be the good word? Like,
Just the standard conventional balance.
Yeah, like
that you'd
standard
have.
conventional in favor of, this is what's getting results. This is what's working.
Yeah.
And again, battle scars. What I have found is the more you try and fight against what the algorithm is algorithming, and that's when you start like getting really, really poor results for accounts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen some accounts where the targets and sponsored brands just have significantly cheaper CPCs. So
yeah,
it just works out better than sponsored products. Again, not so much the case anymore, but years ago, I feel like that was a little bit more prevalent where you could get a decently cheaper CPC on different ad types.
Yeah, I agree. The other thing you might, Lewis, now that I'm thinking of it, because you're saying it's sponsored brand ads can do some funky stuff with the search term targeting. So I would just check. It might be that you're going into Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and cost per clicks are going up, and it's just sort of a natural progression for right now. But I would, whenever I see anything going up, I always want to check the search terms and say like, hey, is there something weird that popped up here that I can get rid of with a negative keyword and help bring down a cost? All right, I'm trying to. All right, Joseph has another question. We got about 5 minutes left. When doing keyword harvesting, so again, we're off the bid ops questions, but we'll keep on with these ones. When doing keyword harvesting from auto campaigns, should you watch out for search terms that came from the substitutes? Because it's possible it's only doing great for people who are willing to purchase substitutes. I would say, I'll jump into this one and you can add context if you want, Dustin, but
Sure.
I would say, like, at the end of the day, you're seeing what's happening in the search term reports and the actual search term that they're typing in, or the product page that they're on, that they're purchasing from. So I wouldn't necessarily be worried that it's triggered through an auto campaign. I will say whenever you're moving something because you want to test it in a manual, I would never negate it in the auto. So you can still keep what's working in the autos and then, just start to see if you can get more intentional with it in manuals.
I completely agree. If it gets orders in the autos, I'll launch it. I don't care about what ad or the auto match type it came from. And I can't think of a time I've ever negated in an auto and had success with it. That's just swimming against the tide, in my opinion.
All right, got some interesting ones about placements in sponsored brands. So I noticed the sponsored brands video, both leading to store and the PDP, started showing up in all three placements. Oh, interesting. So beforehand, sponsored brands to PDP could not show up in top of search. When did this happen? Recently? I would say
I don't have
Amazon
an
is
answer for this one.
always changing. So, I mean, first off, good on you for noticing something interesting and bringing it to the attention. I mean, because Amazon is constantly, it feels like I'm on LinkedIn. It's like every other day somebody's like screenshotting. There's this new weird thing they're trying out in the search grid. Like, I only, and it always seems to like especially ramp up going into like tentpole days. I don't know why. It seems like they ramp up their rollouts or new options or something. I don't know if, am I off there, or do you see similar things?
I'm not in the SERP enough to notice things like this, admittedly. So you'd be better speaking to this than I would, but I don't really have any input on when this happened. And you're right, there are just so many adjustments to placements in the SERP that it's almost impossible to keep up.
Yes. Gosh, I talk to brands and I'm like, dude, I can't even imagine. Like, this is all we do, and I feel like we can barely keep up with it. I can't imagine, which is why I love doing things like this. I'm like, hey, this is what we're seeing. This is what we're doing. This is what, here's some new strategies based on nitty gritty in the weeds stuff, because I know brand owners, you guys have so much more to deal with than just advertising. So hopefully this is a safe space. You can come and ask questions and get answers. But first off, thanks for asking the question, because you shared something new with us today. Cool. All right. It looks like we are at the end of the hour. So Dustin, I highly appreciate you joining us today. And by the way, if you asked a question and we weren't able to get to it, make sure you join us same time. No, same time. I'll do it at the same time. I'm not going to be here next Thursday. Next Thursday is Thanksgiving. So I will do it Wednesday. I'm doing it Wednesday. I'm allowing myself to eat Thanksgiving dinner with the family. You're saying, so he's saying my data showed it happened like a month ago. Interesting.
Okay.
So yeah, I appreciate the context. Dustin, before I let you go, where can people get a hold of you?
LinkedIn. That's my my home base. So if you ever have any questions on any of my content or anything related to this or anything else, just shoot me a DM. I'm fairly responsive, at least I like to think that I am, and I'm happy to help anybody in the space with any questions that they have.
No, Dustin is putting out some amazing content, a lot of stuff, again, nitty gritty in the weeds, breaking down all the nerdiness for those of us who are not as tech savvy as he is. So always appreciate. And then as Dustin is with Better Media, so if you're interested, you definitely can reach out to them. You guys tend to work with more, so you're retail media experts, which means you tend to work with larger brands who are really focused on that holistic retail space, correct?
Yes, correct.
Awesome. And so if you're interested in just keeping on with the Amazon space, so that's our bread and butter. Again, we're bringing incremental strategies for brand owners who are looking to scale. And with that, I really appreciate it. So I will see you all again next Wednesday, same time, different day. And Dustin, again, always thank you for joining. Hopefully you can come back again.
My pleasure. Thanks, Elizabeth, for having me.
Thanks. I would focus more on what I call high. And that wraps up this episode of the Ask Junglr Amazon Advertising Podcast. I hope you found these insights and strategies helpful in your Amazon PPC journey. Remember, if you have a burning Amazon ad question that you'd like answers to, head over to junglr.com/live to join our next live Q&A session. Until next time, keep optimizing those ads and stay hungry.